everyone, my name is Alicia Zager. I am a second grade teacher in Vicksburg, and I've been teaching second grade for 7 years. I've been teaching for 12. Some other experiences are Young Fives and Title I Math and Reading. So I'm excited to get started on my books for you. This first one is called Galimoto by Karen Lynn Williams. And actually, there's some interesting things that I learned about the author here. First of all, Williams is an author who really enjoys writing stories about children in developing countries. And also, she used to teach English with the Peace Corps in Malawi from, let's see where it says 1980 to 1983. She also taught the deaf in Connecticut from 1977 to 1980, and she was in Haiti with her husband when he was a doctor. She was teaching children in Haiti also. So she definitely, you can tell, has a passion for these developing countries and children who live there. So this story, Galimoto, is a boy, Kandi, and he lives in a village in Malawi, and he really is determined to make a Galimoto, which actually, if you didn't know, is, well, let me see what the word is. I want to make sure that I'm saying this right. It's a Chichewa word for car, and it's typically made out of like scrap metal. So he is determined that he's old enough and he wants to make his own Galimoto. But in order to do that, he has to find the metal. So he decides to go about the village and look for it. Well, there's Kandi. But his brother, Ufulu, here, does not think that's a good idea. He thinks his brother's too young, and he kind of teases him and says, "You're never going to be able to make a Galimoto." But Kandi is very determined, and he finds some creative ways to gather up different materials and make his Galimoto. He actually even gets in a little bit of trouble along the way. But it's just a fun story for kids to read about what it might be like, a life might be like for kids who live in these developing countries that don't get to go to Toys R Us and buy themselves a car, a toy car, or ask their parents to get them something at the grocery store when they're getting groceries to pick up a toy. They actually are making their own toys, and it's a fun story to talk to kids about how lives are different in different parts of the world, especially even for kids. The next story I have is called A Chair for My Mother, and the author is Vera B. Williams. And actually, this story is pretty famous. It won, as you can see here, this is a Caldecott Honor Book. And it was also featured on Reading Rainbow. And it's her most famous book, too. Probably a lot of you have heard of it. This was also in one of our articles from this last week on socioeconomic status. So the story is about a family who maybe not have the typical family dynamics. So it's a girl who lives with her mom and her grandma, and their house burns down. And when the house burns down, they lose all of their possessions. So they end up having to move in with an aunt and an uncle. And Mama works in a diner, so she comes home tired all the time and she works really hard. And the family decides that they want to save up money for Mom to get a new chair. So it talks about how the family all works together and saves money, just coins in a jar, until they have enough to roll the money, go to the bank, and buy Mama a chair. And it's just a great story for kids to see that not all of our lives look the same. And not all families are a mom and a dad and kids and living in a house. That families can be grandmas and grandpas living together, and aunts and uncles, and also just that socioeconomic status of some people have to save their coins and work really hard for things like a chair. It doesn't just come it's not something we can all take for granted. A Chair for My Mother. The next story is called Love Lizzie Letters to a Military Mom. And the author on this is Lisa Tucker McElroy. So actually, the author is a law professor, and she likes to write children's books about government. She actually talks about how she really is, I guess, she kind of obsessed, she says, with the U.S. Supreme Court. So she likes to write those types of books for kids. And then this story just follows a girl, Lizzie, whose mom is deployed overseas, fighting in the war. And so the mom leaves and she writes her mom letters back and forth. There's actually at the beginning here too, before I forget, there's a foreword by the United States Senator Dianne, oh my gosh, I'm going to not get her last name right, Feinstein? And it talks just about how this book is really good for kids whose family member may be deployed overseas or away for a long period of time, and how a lot of kids can connect to Lizzie writing these letters and all the emotions and things that she goes through in this story. So it starts off in June, and she's writing her mom letters, drawing her pictures, talking about the different things that her dad and her brother and her are doing while she's away. Some different maps of things that Mama must be missing. Goes into October and all the way through to, and the mom sends pictures back too. So there's a little bit of communication going back and forth there. And then, I guess I don't want to spoil the end for you, but it goes through her whole deployment, and then there's a surprise at the end. But at the very back of the book, there is also a page that talks about, it just gives really helpful tips for when a loved one is away on deployment, and just some different types of things that families can do, like keep your routine as regular as possible. And it just explains about how Lizzie and her dad and her brother kept doing the same things that they would normally be doing if their mom was there, and some different helpful hints. So love Lizzie. This might be great for kids. I don't think there's many books about that, but I haven't seen many. Kids that family members might be away for a while, and they might be feeling scared and anxious and worried and wondering what's going on. They can get some answers and some different, their emotions may be validated in this story here. The next story is Fly Away Home by Eve Bunting. And I know Eve Bunting is a pretty famous, familiar children's author. She's written several books. I think I actually have that written down, over 250, and so many of them have won awards. So you might have heard of her. And this is actually a story about homelessness. And it's a story about a boy and his dad who live in an airport. And they really try hard not to get caught, because if they get caught, like some people do, they get kicked out of their home, which is the airport, of course. So the dad and son, a little boy, kind of change places all the time, and they're trying not to get noticed living in the airport. Dad works on the weekends. He's a janitor, but he doesn't make enough money to help them move out of the airport and buy or rent an apartment. He tries and he works hard, but it's just not being able to make ends meet. So, and then really this story, again, I think it's another one that I might have gotten from that last article that we read about the kindergartners and low socioeconomic status, and how some kids, again, having a home isn't something that all families have. Sometimes we have students that do live in their cars. They live on couches of family members. I know I've had several myself, and this might be a book that they can relate to. And there's kind of some hope in this story where the little boy sees a bird, and something happens with the bird that makes him realize that there might be a way that someday he too will be able to fly away home. Such a great story. And Fly Away Home. Okay, this is a fun one called The Runaway Walk. It's a Chinese New Year tale, and this is a story by Ying Chang Compestine. Hopefully I said that last part right. So it's a Chinese American author, and it's more of a fun story about the Chinese New Year and about this boy, Ming, and how he was sent to the market to go buy food, to get food for the New Year's festival. But his family doesn't really have a lot of money. Even though the father works for the richest man in the town, he still doesn't have enough money because the rich man is not very generous. So it talks about how he is supposed to go to the market and get food, but he ends up coming back with this wok, and the family has no idea why he's come back with this wok. They're kind of a little bit irritated with him at first, but ends up that the wok is pretty magical, and the wok runs off, and well, here's the wok that he gets instead of the food, but the wok runs off and comes back with some different surprises all throughout the story. Some really cool pictures in here too. So basically the wok kind of teaches the rich family a lesson that sharing, and the wok kind of goes and takes different things from the mom, the dad, and the little boy from the rich family and gives it to the poor family so that they can have a celebration for Chinese New Year also. And then this story actually at the end has an author's note that really talks about the Chinese New Year and what different traditions and food and different types of festivities that might be happening during that time. And then at the very, very end, there is also a recipe for festive stir-fried rice. I loved the pictures, how colorful they were, and just the different foods and clothings and things that you can see in the different houses, or I guess buildings that were in this story. Okay, that is The Runaway Wok. I read this to my kids too, my students, because of course I wanted to know what all these books were about and have some real experience reading them to them, and the kids really, really were engaged in this story. They thought it was really funny, and they enjoyed it. Okay, this story is called Zane and the Hurricane. It's a story of Katrina by Rodman Philbrick, and this is a chapter book for, I'd say it's about a 5th grade reading level, but it was a book that was a Battle of the Books book a couple years ago, so I read this as a coach and wrote questions about it, and I really enjoyed the story a lot, so I wanted to share that with you. This is a story about Zane, and Zane is biracial. He lives in New Hampshire with his mom, who is white, and he never really knew his African American father. His dad died before, well, when he was really young. And so he's never met his dad's side of the family before. But eventually, right around his 13th birthday, his mom finds his father's grandmother, who lives in New Orleans. So they decide that Zane needs to go visit his dad's side of the family to learn more about their culture and their heritage, and meet some different family members down there. So he kind of hesitant, I guess reluctantly, goes down there. And while he's down there, he's staying with his great-grandma, and the Hurricane Katrina, is about to hit. And Grandma and Zane's little dog, they are planning to evacuate with Grandma's Baptist church. So they plan on evacuating, but something goes terribly wrong, and Zane does not end up in the bus with his grandma. He ends up staying behind when the hurricane hits. He's alone with his dog, and disaster strikes. And so it goes through the whole story of Zane when the hurricane strikes, and what happens to him afterwards when he is trying to get to safe ground. It goes through him meeting some friends along the way and also meeting some people who were not so friendly along the way. And then, of course, the whole time he can't get a hold of his mother, and his mom is panicking because she doesn't know if he's safe and if he's not. So many different adventures and wonderful things, but also terrible things happen in this story. And it's a great one. You should definitely read it. Okay, I guess I'll have to speed it up a little bit here. This is called Friends Around the World. And this is a text. It's written by Anna Gallen. It's a text in the reading program that I read, or that we're using in our school for our elementary students right now. And I actually just got done reading this story about 3 weeks ago. And my kids love this book. So it's about a girl named Isabel. And this is Isabel. And she gets an assignment that she is going to have 3 e-pals from different parts around places in the world, different countries. She's going to write emails back and forth and learn about their culture, and they're going to learn about hers. So this map kind of shows you where all of those e-pals come from. So we have Hao in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City, and we have Akiak, who is in Yellowknife, Canada, and Dan in the Australian outback. And it goes through emails between Isabel and Hao and Akiak and Dan. And the kids are learning so many different facts and things about each country, as well as the people who live there and what kinds of things that the kids do in each of these places. My kids were super interested in so many different things in the story, but particularly in Vietnam, they really wanted to know about some of the food, especially dragon fruit, when she talks about dragon fruit. So we watched, we kind of researched it a little bit, watched a little short video about a boy that just kind of walking you through cutting a dragon fruit and what it might taste like. And then we had a parent buy some dragon fruit, bring it in, and we cut it up and ate it in class, and the kids just absolutely loved it. So this story kind of goes through the whole thing and talks about how their communities, there might be quite different, but there are a lot of things that these kids all might have in common also. So this is a fun nonfiction story for kids to learn about different countries and cultures. Then we have Bear Dream by Will Hobbs. And this is a Native American tale about, oh my gosh, I hope I get his name right. Short Tail, I was right. Short Tail. And Short Tail is really worried about the Great One. The Great One is a bear, and he is hibernating, and he has not woken up for spring. So he gets worried, and he decides to take off and go find Great Bear. So on his way to go find Great Bear, he ends up falling asleep. And when he's asleep, he has a dream about Great Bear waking and taking him to see a bear dance. And the bear dance is a ritual, a tradition, like a rite of passage, or rite of, I guess, passage, to spring. And so he ends up going back when he wakes up from his dream and telling his people about this dream that he had, and starting this whole tradition of these the Ute people, and the bear dream. Let's see if I can find that page. So here are the bears dancing, and then Short Tail going back to his people and sharing his dream, which then becomes a tradition. It was just, I read a little bit about the author, who actually himself did participate in a bear dance back in 1973, and he wanted to write this story. He actually has written a few books about Native Americans and bears, because they're so important with Native Americans, and bears have a lot of ties, and in their traditions and different tales that they have told And so he ends up, he did the bear dance and decides to write all these stories. But he is hoping that this tradition never dies and that through some of these stories he can keep the Ute bear dance a tradition, and that humans will see the value in native wisdom, and the closeness to nature will be also valued. So that's Bear Dream. And then we have The Librarian of Basra, a true story from Iraq. And this is a story about the librarian in Basra, Iraq. Her name is Alia. Find her. And she loves her books and she values her books in her library. When war strikes and the town or village of Basra is threatened, she decides to ask if she can get all of her books from the library moved, and the government says no. So she kind of takes it upon herself to pack up all her books and put them in a safe place, which she actually has to move a couple of times. And then eventually Basra is under attack and the library burns to the ground. So it's a story about the war in Iraq and about this true woman who saves her books, and she actually ends up saving, it says in the back here, 70% of the library's books by doing this. So there's a little author's note about the true inspiration behind this story. Librarian of Basra. And my last book, I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but this I saved the best for last, I think. This is called Each Kindness. This is one of my all-time favorite stories. I love to read this to kids. The beginning of the year for like building classroom community, but also when we talk about random acts of kindness, which is usually around Christmas time. And this is a wonderful story by Jacqueline Woodson, who is an African-American author. And this is the story of Maya, who is a girl from a poor family who starts a new school, and she tries to make friends with Chloe and Chloe's friends, but Chloe just doesn't want to have any part of being friends with Maya. She sees that her clothes are torn and old and ragged, and she ignores her every time she tries to talk to her. And this goes on for quite a while, and then it eventually even turns into almost Chloe is talking about her behind her back and being mean with her friends. And then one day Maya doesn't show up to school, and the teacher decides to talk about kindness by showing them that a pebble thrown into water will create ripples, which then simulates how kindness, one kind thing, can go out into the world and inspire more kind things. And after that lesson, she really starts thinking about the way that she treated Maya and hopes that Maya comes back to school so that she can smile at her and talk to her and be a friend. But you'll have to read to find out if Maya does come back to school or does not. All right. Sorry I took up 23 minutes of your time, but I hope you enjoyed the book selection. Thank you.